It was supposed to be a discreet meeting, a critical discussion with the Attorney General about a case that could reshape the state's legal landscape. But as he sat in his secluded chalet, papers strewn across the table, the door burst open. The HOA, armed with complaints about unshoveled snow and unapproved exterior lights, stormed in, oblivious to the high-stakes conversation they'd just derailed. He sat at the oak table in his chalet, the faint hum of a space heater filling the silence between his words. The Attorney General, a man with a reputation for precision and an unyielding commitment to protocol, leaned forward, his pen tapping rhythmically against a legal pad. The discussion was delicate, a matter of public corruption allegations that had been simmering for months. He had chosen this chalet, tucked away in the snowy hills of a gated community, for its isolation, its promise of uninterrupted focus. The nearest neighbor was a quarter-mile away, and the only sound outside was the occasional crunch of snow under deer hooves. Or so he thought. The meeting had been planned meticulously. He'd driven up the night before, arriving under the cover of dusk to avoid prying eyes. The Attorney General had followed, his black SUV pulling into the driveway just after 9 a.m. They'd exchanged brief pleasantries, the kind that acknowledged the gravity of their purpose without wasting time. By 10 a.m. they were deep into the details. Names, dates, financial records, and whispers of a cover-up that could topple a network of influential figures. He spoke carefully, laying out the evidence he'd gathered over months of quiet investigation. The Attorney General listened, his face unreadable but his questions sharp, probing for weaknesses in the case. The chalet's walls, lined with cedar, Marissa's wood, seemed to hold the cold at bay. Outside, the snow fell in lazy flakes, blanketing the world in silence. It was the perfect setting for a conversation that demanded absolute secrecy. He'd chosen this place for that reason. No interruptions, no distractions. The HO, he'd assumed, would have no reason to bother him. His dues were paid, his property compliant. He'd even checked the mailbox for notices before heading up. Everything was in order. But the HOA, it turned out, had other ideas. The first sign of trouble was the sharp rap at the door. It came at 10:47 a.m., a sound so abrupt it cut through his sentence mid-word. He froze, glancing at the Attorney General, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The knock came again, louder, insistent. He stood, his stomach tightening. "One moment," he said, crossing the room to the door. Through the frosted glass, he saw 3 figures bundled in coats, their faces obscured by scarves and hats. He opened the door, expecting a delivery or a lost traveler. Instead, he was met by Margaret Hensley, the HOA president, her clipboard clutched like a weapon. Behind her stood 2 others, Tom, the treasurer, and a woman he vaguely recognized from a community meeting. Their expressions were stern, almost theatrical in their disapproval. "Mr. Reynolds," Margaret began, her voice clipped, "we need to discuss several violations." He blinked, caught off guard. "Violations? I'm in the middle of something. Can this wait?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "I'm afraid it cannot. The board has received complaints, and we have a responsibility to address them immediately." The Attorney General, still seated at the table, cleared his throat. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone calm but carrying an edge that suggested he was not accustomed to interruptions. Margaret's gaze flicked past him, registering the Attorney General's presence. Her lips pursed, but she pressed on. "This is a community matter, sir. Mr. Reynolds, your driveway has not been shoveled in accordance with Regulation 4.2.1, and those exterior lights you installed last month were not approved by the Architectural Committee." He felt a surge of irritation. "The driveway was shoveled yesterday, and the lights were approved. I submitted the forms in October." Margaret flipped through her clipboard. "We have no record of that approval, and the snow accumulation exceeds the permitted limit as of this morning." He glanced back at the Attorney General, who was watching the exchange with a mix of amusement and impatience. "Margaret, I'm in a meeting. Can we handle this later? I'll come by the office this afternoon." Tom stepped forward, his voice gruff. This isn't just about the driveway. There's also the matter of the unauthorized firewood stack. It's too close to the property line. He stared incredulous. The firewood. It's been there for years. No one's ever mentioned it before. The third member of the group, the woman whose name he couldn't recall, chimed in. Rules change, Mr. Reynolds. We're enforcing them uniformly now. The Attorney General stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. Perhaps I can be of assistance, he said, his voice carrying the weight of his authority. He reached into his briefcase and produced a card. I'm the Attorney General. Mr. Reynolds and I are engaged in a matter of some importance. I'd appreciate it if you could schedule this discussion for another time. Margaret's eyes widened slightly, but she held her ground. With all due respect, sir, the HOA operates independently of external authorities. These violations must be addressed. He felt his patience unraveling. This is absurd. I'm in compliance. The driveway's fine, the lights were approved, and the firewood's been there forever. You can't just barge in here. We didn't barge in, Margaret interrupted. We knocked. And as per the HOA bylaws, Section 7.3, we are authorized to conduct inspections with reasonable notice. Notice, he snapped. You call showing up unannounced notice. The Attorney General placed a hand on his shoulder, a subtle signal to stay calm. Let's resolve this quickly, he said to Margaret. What exactly do you need from Mr. Reynolds to move this along? Margaret flipped another page on her clipboard. Immediate remediation of the driveway snow, removal or relocation of the firewood stack, and submission of a new application for the exterior lights, with a $50 late fee. He opened his mouth to argue, but the Attorney General spoke first. Fine. Mr. Reynolds will address these issues by end of day. Is that sufficient? Margaret hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to being addressed with such finality. Well, yes, but we'll need to verify. You'll verify tomorrow, the Attorney General said, his tone leaving no room for debate. Thank you for your diligence. The trio exchanged glances, then nodded curtly and retreated into the snow. He closed the door, his jaw tight. I'm sorry about that, he said, returning to the table. I had no idea they'd show up like this. The Attorney General waved a hand dismissively. Bureaucrats. They're everywhere. Let's get back to work. They resumed their discussion, but the interruption lingered in his mind. The HOA's audacity, their insistence on trivial matters in the face of a meeting of this magnitude, gnawed at him. He'd chosen this chalet for its privacy, its distance from the chaos of the city. Yet here they were, derailed by snow and firewood. As the conversation with the Attorney General continued, he outlined the next steps. Subpoenas, witness interviews, a potential grand jury. The case was complex, involving a web of financial transactions that pointed to a prominent official. The evidence was strong but not airtight, and the Attorney General pressed him for more details, more connections. He answered methodically, his notes organized, his arguments clear. But every so often, his mind drifted to the HO. Why now? Why this level of scrutiny over minor issues? By noon they'd made significant progress. The Attorney General seemed satisfied, though his guarded demeanor gave little away. They agreed to reconvene in a week, after he'd gathered additional documentation. As the Attorney General packed his briefcase, he glanced out the window. Snow's picking up, he said. Better get that driveway cleared before your friends return. He forced a smile. I'll handle it. After the Attorney General left, he stood by the window, watching the snow fall. The HOA's visit felt like more than just an overzealous enforcement of rules. Something about Margaret's tone, Tom's insistence, the third woman's vague familiarity. It didn't sit right. He grabbed his phone and called his lawyer, a precaution to ensure the HOA's demands were legitimate. The lawyer confirmed the bylaws allowed for inspections but agreed the unannounced visit was unusual. Sounds like they're targeting you, he said. Any idea why? He didn't, but the thought stuck with him. He spent the afternoon shoveling the driveway, moving the firewood stack, and drafting a new application for the lights. The tasks were mundane, infuriating in their pettiness, but he complied to avoid further conflict. By evening, the chalet was quiet again, the snow piling up outside. He sat by the fire, reviewing his notes from the meeting, trying to refocus. The next morning, he drove to the HOA office, a small building at the entrance of the community. Margaret was there, her clipboard ever present. He handed over the application and the late fee, keeping his tone neutral. "Everything should be in order now," he said. She reviewed the documents with a critical eye. "We'll see. The board will vote on the lights at next week's meeting." He nodded, unwilling to engage further. As he turned to leave, Tom called out, "You know, Mr. Reynolds, it's nothing personal. We just enforce the rules." He didn't respond. Back at the chalet, he pored over his case files, but the HOA's intrusion gnawed at him. He began to wonder if it was connected to the case. The official under investigation had deep ties to the community, owned a vacation home nearby. Could someone have tipped off the HOA, hoping to disrupt his work? The thought seemed paranoid, but he couldn't shake it. Over the next few days, he dug deeper. He called a contact at the county records office, pulling property records for Margaret, Tom, and the third woman, whose name he learned was Susan. Nothing stood out, no direct ties to the official. But Susan's husband worked for a law firm that had represented the official's company years ago. It was a thin connection, but it was enough to raise his suspicions. He contacted the Attorney General, who listened patiently to his theory. "It's possible," he said. "But focus on the evidence for now. If the HOA's involved, we'll find out." The following week, the HOA approved his lights, but the approval came with a warning. Any further violations would result in fines. He complied, keeping his driveway clear and his firewood stack within bounds. But he began watching the HOA closely, noting their patterns, their meetings. He installed a security camera outside the chalet just in case. Months passed, and the case progressed. Subpoenas were issued, witnesses deposed. The official's network began to unravel, and the Attorney General grew confident in a conviction. But the HOA remained a thorn in his side. Random inspections, notices about minor infractions, a mailbox flag not lowered properly, a trash bin left out too long. Each time he complied, but the pattern was clear. They were watching him. One evening, as he reviewed case files, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Careful what you dig into, Reynolds." He stared at the message, his pulse quickening. He forwarded it to the Attorney General, who promised to trace it. The next day, a new HOA notice arrived, citing an unapproved paint color on his shed. He hadn't painted the shed in years. The harassment continued, subtle but relentless. He hired a private investigator to look into the HOA board. The investigator found no concrete evidence of collusion, but Susan's husband's firm had recently received a large contract from a company linked to the official. The connection was circumstantial, but it was enough to keep him on edge. As the case neared trial, the HOA's actions intensified. A citation for an overgrown shrub, a complaint about a car parked too close to the road. He began to suspect they were trying to distract him, to wear him down. He met with the Attorney General again, this time in the city, far from the chalet. They agreed to keep the HOA issue separate from the case but to monitor it closely. The trial began in the spring. The evidence was damning, and the official's defense crumbled. He testified, his testimony measured and precise. The jury deliberated for 3 days before delivering a guilty verdict. The official was sentenced to 7 years. The Attorney General shook his hand afterward, a rare smile breaking through. "Good work," he said. Back at the chalet, the HOA's harassment slowed but didn't stop. A final notice arrived, claiming his chimney needed cleaning by a certified professional. He complied, but he never stopped watching. The private investigator found a paper trail linking Susan's husband's firm to a shell company tied to the official's network. It wasn't enough for charges, but it was enough for him to know the HOA's intrusion that snowy morning hadn't been random. He moved out of the chalet a year later, selling it to a young couple unaware of its history. The case was closed, the official behind bars, but the HOA's role remained a shadow in his mind. He never confronted them, there was no proof, only suspicion. But as he drove away from the gated community for the last time, he glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Margaret's clipboard in the distance.